Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today I'm gonna show you how to make Peak Time Techno in the style of Filth On Acid label. So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over my Peak Time Techno 3 Ableton template. If you're interested in the template, you can grab it, link in the description. This template has been made during my live stream session that I do on my other Audio React channel every 2 Sundays. So you can basically go over and check out how I created the track from scratch. So yeah, today we're gonna focus more on the sound design composition of each element and why I decided to create this element, and next week we will focus more on the arrangement, automation, variation, mixing and mastering. Right, so let's have a listen first how it sounds. Right, so you get an idea of more or less what element you can find and the idea of the track. So let's get started with the Sidechain Track. It's basically a track which is on send only, so you don't hear it. I just use it as a trigger for my sidechain compression. So it's just a 909 clap. And yeah, let's start it with the kick, which sounds like this. So I'm gonna remove the effect and we're gonna listen to the kick by itself. Alright, so I haven't done much process. The kick sounds pretty good by default. This is a kick from my Solid Techno kick sample pack. If you want to know how to create this kind of kick, I've made a couple of tutorials about kick that you can check out on the channel. I also make a video about how to make techno in the style of Bass 92 and UMake, and it's a similar type of kick, so I give some tips as well. Then I just add some rumble. So this is a rack I created to being able to easily create a rumble. You can either do it with delay or reverb. I'm not gonna explain the rack anyway. I will put the link in the description if you wanna find out more about the rack. And then it's an EQ just like to rebalance a little. So I cut here at quite high. And I boost in the same time. You can see there is a stronger Q. But the main thing here is I'm boosting a lot the high, mainly to give kind of a bit more punch and to help the kick cut through the mix. So it seems a bit maybe abusive in solo, but yeah, it's really helping the... And then it's just limiter, it's just like kind of make things a bit louder. But then let's go and jump into the hat. So I have close hi-hat, open hat, a second open hat, and right. The close hi-hat, it's doing a classic 16 close hi-hat. Nothing crazy, pretty straightforward. Here I just process it a little with overdrive, just to enhance the high frequency. And then I boost a little. I boost here, you can hear. Kind of like it. And then because of this rack, so this is a rack I've made as well, I will put the link in the description, is just to make my life easier. I can just like drop some sample, hat sample or any drum sample, but I mainly use it for hats, and I can control the decay, and I have as well some return already made, so I can send my hats up. For example, here I'm sending into a reverb. And it's a reverb I created especially for this rack, so for drums basically, so it worked perfectly, and this way it kind of fastened my workflow. And then I have 2 open hats playing off beat. You can hear there is some delay as well. Here what I've done with my open hats, it's something I like to do, is putting the attack around 30 milliseconds. It gives a kind of shaker effect. It's hard to explain, but here it's very percussive, which can be nice. But by doing this with the attack, I don't know, it kind of created driving effect. I cannot really explain why, but it's just work like that. So that's something I like to do. Then it's just some EQing, it's kind of mixing EQing, so I'll come back to it probably next week. But it's just to enhance and boost the frequency that are important to the sound and that has well help to stand out in the mix. Okay, so yeah, here is I send it to the reverb as well and to some delay. Again, it's a delay especially made for hats, so if I stop, add a bit of movement and kind of adding a layer as well because it's at a lower volume, so you kind of have an extra layer on the background, if you can say so. And then a second open hat, again with the attack at 30%, adding a second because you can add an extra energy when you build your track. You, like for example here in this track, I will have first the open hat playing, the first one, and then after I add the second one, and it adds another layer of energy, let's say. Not that much process. As you can see, there is actually no process. Just send to reverb and delay here again. And finally, I have the ride, which plays here. And the ride, nothing crazy, just a bit of EQ. Just there was this frequency here I removed. I mean, I reduced it, I didn't remove it, because there is some annoying frequencies often with ride, but you can remove them or you can just attenuate them, because the problem, if you remove all of the resonant frequency of your ride, you lose all of the character of your ride. So this is Ableton delay that I put in time mode with no feedback and the driver at 100%. What it allows me with a very short decay time, what it allows me is to have a stereo effect. Basically the right signal is slightly delayed from the left one, which kind of trick your ears and create a nice stereo effect. And I like to do that because now you ride are on the side and it leaves space for example, the other hats which are more like centered. And then it's just some sidechain compression. These usually are my basic settings for sidechain compression. The ratio at 4. So it's not too strong, but not too weak neither. Fast attack, obviously, because you want the pumping effects to be direct. Short release. And then after the threshold, I adjust accordingly to how much I want of the pumping effect. And yeah, there is some detune on the ride here at this moment, but I will talk about it next week. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There is no any other... I didn't group process. Sometimes I had the drum bus. I haven't done it for this project. And let me talk about the MIDI actually, because I talked about the close hi-hat, but I didn't talk about the open hat. So you have different kind of patterns. So first it's coming, so 16 close hi-hat, then you have your offbeat, first open hat, then you have the second open hat, which is playing offbeat as well. And then I changed the pattern of the open hat to a kind of more driving pattern. So this is kind of a classic pattern where your velocity go from the minimum to the minimum being on the beat and the maximum being off beat, and it kind of create this takata takata driving effect compared to just add an extra energy. And then I introduce the ride later on, where you have one playing on the beat, one playing off beat. That's basically our hats pattern. Then you have clap. So the clap sound like this. It's a classic 909 clap. There is not much process. Classic 909 hat. I pitch it down 1 semitone. Just boost here a little. Cut the under 200 that I didn't really need it. Bit of reverb. And then what drum bass does, compress a little bit, but mainly I add a bit of crunch, which is gonna add some harmonics and make it a bit louder. And here there is a transient. You can hear without the transient how you can hear the reverb. And with the transient, how it's shut down the reverb tail. And I like to use this. It's kind of acting as a gate, you know, like if you was putting a gate after your reverb, cut the tail, that act in a similar way. And this is playing every 2 beats, so it's classic pattern. All right, then we have our first percussion, which kind of part of the groove. It is just this percussion. Because I play at G2, it's kind of pitched down. Usually the original sample would be more like... But yeah, because I play G2, it's kind of pitched down. And it just works well with the kick and the rumble. And it's kind of a bit of a reggaeton style, like. With just before just before. So you have your first kick here, you have your second kick here, so it's just right before the second kick, and then it's right between between the second and the third kick. Then you have some percussion which are more like to add variation. They are like just playing here and there. They are playing only at the intro and outro, so it's just like to add some layer to your intro outro to don't be too empty neither. And you can hear it's like, again, it's like kind of a pitch down percussion, so it sounds like this. And then I filter it and bit of reverb, and this is kind of more in the background. You hear it without really hearing it, but it adds this variation. And the Percs 3 is the same idea. It's not really a percussion, it's more like a kind of a synth shot, but it's made with a synth, but it's kind of a percussive element, so I consider it as a perc. And it's the same ideas to add a bit of layer at your intro and outro where it's quite empty, so it adds a bit of variation. And the idea is, I mean, like the sound itself, more kind of a very clicky sound, as you can hear. And actually the patch doesn't, I mean, I use basic shape and I use this warp, but this doesn't really matter that much. The thing is, it's a very low note, and it's just a click sound, be honest. Like I could have done this in a way much more different way, like just having a very sharp envelope with no attack and a very short GK. It's just a click, but this little click that I put hard curve to saturate it and add a bit more harmonics. And then this into some reverb. So as you can see, a very long GK and a good amount of dry wet, 50%. I accentuate the stereo to make sure it's like in the white space. And yeah, I add a bit of EQ as well to still boost around here. And the sound by itself is not really that interesting, but inside the track it does the job to add variation. Because you don't really hear the original sound, but you hear more like the reverb tail, and the reverb tail is quite interesting. And yeah, so that's why I've put that. Now we have our hat SFX1, hat SFX2, and snare rolls. The SFX1 I reuse the same drum than here, but I actually use just the close hat and the open hat. I use exactly the same pattern, but I kind of transform them into a SFX. And the way to do that is I apply a lot of delay, and you're gonna hear, and as well there is automation on the gain, so it will progressively go from mute to hear it more and more. And but because of delay and the very long feedback, it helps build tension. So that's the first thing I've done. And the second thing, it's basically operator with white noise. And here again, very short GK. And here what I do is I automate the GK. So you start with a very clicky sound, and the more you go, the longer the decay gets. And there is few things happening here. First, you have a very long reverb, so it's gonna add a lot of noise, big dry rate amount. You have delay as well, where I increase the feedback as well, so it's kind of adding more and more tension. And again, I automate the gain, so it's like a progressive, it's a rising effect. It kind of acts like a white noise, classic white noise. It's just a different way to do it. And together in the track, let me remove the snare roll. Start to hear them. And then you have a snare roll, which is a classic snare roll. So the MIDI pattern here is like 16 note pattern, it's classic. And here I have a snare roll, which is the same. Here I didn't make again volume automation. What I've done is I play with the velocity, so you can see it's like a crescendo velocity. So here it gets very quiet, and here the more you go, the louder it gets. First at the beginning you don't really hear it. Here what I'm doing is I'm filtering the snare roll, so it starts highly filtered. And doing that just adds some tension, and it works better for that case than the classic snare roll. Obviously it goes into a lot of reverb with a very long GK, so yeah, that's how it sounded. And all together, so that helped to build the tension before any drop. You can see I've used these 3 elements only to make transition. Then we have our bass sound, which sound like this. So the pattern is pretty simple. You have a 16 rolling bass line, and then it goes 1 semitone upper, and the sound itself, you can hear it's heavily filtered, so I'm just gonna deactivate the effect right now. Basically, the sound is a classic type of acid sound. You take a sawtooth waveform. Here I used the saw dual, but I could have used the basic, you know, and it's going through a low pass filter, 12 dB with very high resonance. So that's what's gonna get you a kind of acid sound. It's not exactly an acid sound, but it sounds a little bit like a bit of modulation on the filter with an envelope. So this way you get this plucky effect with the resonance. Hard curve is just makes everything beefier, just to make sure the bass is in modo. Here's just some sidechain. The thing is, this track I didn't want it to be an acid track, so I wanted to have this kind of rolling acid bass line, but a bit more like discrete way, like in the background being there but without being there. So that's why I apply 2 EQ to really filter the sound, and then a bit of reverb. And the reverb kind of has its importance because put this bass sound into a room, and this room feeling, this room tone is quite nice. You can hear. And actually with the rest of the track, that's what really make it interesting. I could have maybe almost cut the bass because I don't really need it, but... And you say this way at this level, all the track like this, I didn't automate it because obviously I don't want it to steal the show. Like I said, I just want this discrete bass sound in the background, but which add a driving feeling, a bit of energy to your track, so yeah. Alright, then we have this drone sound, which is kind of a classic sound. This you will hear it a lot in techno, and it's a classic super saw sound. So you need to take 2 sawtooth waveforms. So here I have one on oscillator 1, one on oscillator 2. There is different way to achieve that, but for example, first you can detune one oscillator to the other. And that's create this nice detune effect. Obviously the unison play a big part as well. If I remove it, sound different. And yeah, second thing which is important here is the glide, because if we go to our MIDI pattern, you can see like notes overlap each other, which is gonna give this pitch modulation between notes. On the opposite, if you remove the glide, it works, but it's not the same. You don't have this nice pitch modulation. And yeah, and then everything is going through a low pass filter. That's I automate because it's for the break. Obviously, it's to add tension, and so I wanted to keep it low. And obviously, I make it rise the more and the more you go into the break, because obviously, the more you're gonna open the cutoff, the more it's gonna add tension. The more your breakdown gets exciting. Then after, yeah, let me talk about the effect before to play it again. Just cutting the unnecessary low frequency. I could have left them after all. I don't know why I didn't left them, because it's the breakdown. There is not the kick playing. So, but yeah, anyway, put it in mono. So the reason you might think it's weird to have put it in mono, and the main reason is because then you have in this part as well the ARP, which is kind of very stereo, and you have the lead which is going to be introduced, which is going to be super stereo as well. And obviously it's to leave the room for these 2 elements. So I put the drone in mono. Obviously, I don't want it to be too mono neither. The thing is, if I remove the mono, it's like very stereo. And I want it more like a sound which is mono, but where I will add a bit of reverb, which is gonna make it a bit stereo, but obviously not as stereo as the unison. And then the drum burst to kind of compress, add a bit of harmonic with the crunch. And then in the track, it really helps build tension. So the filter open. And yeah, let's move into one of the main first element, which is the harp, which sounds like this. So without the effect, here again I use a sawtooth and another kind of sawtooth, but that I pitch it 1 octave upper. So when you have this very high pitched sound with one which is more like an octave down, and you bring them both together, you get a richer sound. I didn't put all the volume way up. I wanted like have a nice blending between two, because obviously the one which is as a higher pitch is gonna sound louder. Everything is going through a low pass filter, and here the trick is in the envelope. You can hear there is this kind of fluty effect. So if I remove the attack on both the amplitude and the one modulating the filter, you have something different, but putting around 60 milliseconds here and 30 milliseconds here kind of give this kind of most like a flute effect. For that, you need as well to have your sustain at 0. Both the amp and the envelope 2 have pretty similar envelope, so that's why I'm switching from one and another. And very short GK as well help to have that. Here is just a filter modulating by envelope 2, and to make it the sound a bit more exciting, I usually like to modulate with LFO some parameters. So here I choose to modulate the pulse width modulation, which is gonna add a bit of excitement. So that's very hard to hear without reverb. Let me just put the reverb at least. So without, it adds this little excitement, and you can do that as well with the pitch, but being very gentle. Here you can see I modulate actually the pitch as well, kind of a vibrato, but very small amount. It's barely audible. And then medium curve is just to add some saturation, make the sound louder. EQ, just to get rid of the low and the very high. Delay. Classic ping pong delay with sync in 3 mode. I use all the time these settings. Quite some feedback and some dry wet. The filter is activated, but it's kind of the full range anyway. Obviously the reverb make a big difference. Here I choose the algorithm only and the tight one with a decay around 3 seconds, and I bring the size a little bit up, 30% dry wet. Bring the stereo up, like to really have a very wide stereo reverb. I cut here the high, so I get rid of this noisy tail, you see, because it creates a lot of noise. Here's the same as well why I cut that much here, because I feel like the wavetable had a bit of digital noise and not really like pleasant high frequencies, so I kind of cut them, and it makes the sound a bit more smooth and pleasant to your ears. Trying to make it even more stereo, and then it's just some sidechain, and yeah. And then the pattern, so we are in J minor, so you have G the root, and then it's, so you can consider this at should be there, but I put it an octave upper, and then after it's like this is like the fifth basically. If you bring this an octave upper, it's like +7 semitone, so you have the root +7 +8 +9 +7 root +7 +8, and then you have C, which is the fifth, which should be like +5. Obviously here it's like -7, but it's inverse the root, and then +7, and then the pattern repeats over. Here the pattern you see is like 1.5 bars. It's kind of a different length than our lead, which is here, which is more like a 4-bar pattern. So it kind of creates this polymeter along the track. And speaking of the lead, which is our main element, so there is few things about this sound. Here you can see I kind of use a similar technique than the harp. The main thing here, what we've done is, again, we use 2 sawtooths and we slightly detune one to each other. So here I have the quad saw, and here I have the one from the basic shape, and I've just detuned them, and you're gonna see how it affects the sound. add a lot of excitement. Second things done important, you can see the pulse width modulation here, it's at 70% on both, so it's gonna create and make the sound way much more hollow than it was originally. So this was originally. With the pulse width. This is not a problem because it's a lead sound, so it's gonna play more in the mid-high frequency, so it's fine if you lose a little bit of the low frequency, but it adds a nice tone to your sound. And then everything is going through a low pass filter and it's modulated by an envelope, so which is envelope 2. You can see here again amp and envelope 2 are pretty similar, and you can here see again the attack is at 20 milliseconds, is what's give all to the sound. If I remove the attack, if I make a very fast attack, I have a percussive sound, which sounds great, which that's why I modulate as well. But you have as well more kind of abrasive, fluty effect with the attack around 20 milliseconds. The decay being short as well is pretty important. If you keep something around 100, you have a very sharp sound. If you go a little bit more like, let's say like normal, which be 600, it loses all of the character, it loses all the sharpness of the sound, and obviously for that you no sustain, and the release kind of very sharp as well. I just use it automated during the breakdown to add a bit more tail and add to the sound a bit more tension. So yeah, modulating by a low pass filter, and then I have the LFO modulating the pulse width modulation here again, but you can see at a very small amount. Just enhance a little bit this phasing, detuning effect. Then everything goes through utility, accentuating the width, making sure the bass in mono, but this don't be a problem. And I just like kind of a bit of mix with the balance a little bit on the left. And here is a flanger effect, 20%, so it's not a big amount. The reason of this flanger effect is flanger effect gonna kind of add a very weird phase shifting, and it's kind of changing the sound. You can hear like that your sound is changing, but it doesn't really change the tone. So it's great because this way you have the impression that your sound is evolving, always changing, constantly changing, but it doesn't change the character, the original tone of your sound. So that's great to avoid it to be too boring very quickly. Then you have vocoder, which add a bit of noise, because Ableton Wavetable by default doesn't have noise. So if you want to add a bit of noise to your sound, because it's usually work well, especially with sharp and percussive sound, the EQ I just put here just to enhance, and then after it's more like a low pass filter, but this is more like for arrangement purpose, for example, to bring the sound in. A bit of sidechain compression, and then you have the delay. Again, which is my classic setting with the feedback and the dry rate around 30%, ping pong delay mode, and this in sync at 3, and then I filter it a little bit. And delay is always great to add a bit of movement, add a bit of stereo as well, because obviously you can hear now you lead a little bit on the left side. And then everything goes through a reverb, obviously, because you want to put it into a big space. And drum bass is like kind of final compressing and making things as loud as you can. I put it medium with a bit of drive. Compressor kind of make it a little bit more in your face and kind of glue everything together between the dry sound, the reverb, and the delay, and everything is more compact. Crunch obviously makes things more louder. And transient is to kind of act, like I said, as a gate with the reverb. Like the tail of the reverb is way much more controlled and less messy. And then after it's just some volume automation, but that I will come back to it at the arrangement. And yeah, the notes that it's playing, it goes from G to G but an octave upper. And it goes down, so that was plus 12 semitone, then it's plus 10, plus 8, plus 7, so it's kind of following the harp as well, if you remember. And yeah, and then for the last one, it just go up, down again, so exactly the same note, but then you go back to the plus 7, which is your fifth there. And then here is exactly doing the same, so except that instead of going here to your fifth, it goes back up to plus 10, and then here again you have the same kind of little variation at the end of the bar. and then I have lead up, which is basically exactly the same patch, so I'm not gonna go over it. It's exactly the same patch. The reason why I differentiate it is this one is exactly the same pattern as well, but it's playing an octave upper than this one, and this adds some excitement. I use it always just before the drop, and you're gonna hear what I mean by adding some excitement. The reason why it's on the second channel is just for kind of arrangement purpose, because I needed this sound, the one which is playing at the normal octave, I needed to shut down very quick when the one playing at a higher octave play. And if I was doing this like this, here I cannot cut basically either the reverb of the delay, and so basically all of this sound playing here, because of the delay and the reverb, kind of create a tail that I need to shut down, and I cannot obviously, because if this one is still playing, I still need my delay and my reverb for this high pitched note. So what I've done is I just duplicate the pattern just for this part, so this way I could shut down here, and so this way if I solo here, you can hear how quickly it shut down, rather than if I was leaving this one up and so I couldn't shut it down, it would be like. So you have a pretty long tail, pretty loud, and you don't want that. You want to leave space for this one, and especially it play at the beginning with a very short GK and attack, so it's not like the most louder sound, so you need to leave room, so that's why I duplicate it. Alright, then we have all our little synth which is gonna play here and there. This is to add variation, make things more interesting. So you have this, for example, stab. And this is gonna play every time I introduce kind of a new element, it's gonna play. So you can see here every time I'm gonna introduce the second open hat playing, it's basically every 8 bar almost, and it's gonna play, and it's just like G but playing on the Rattle 16 effect for 2-bit. And to make this sound, you won't be surprised if I told you that I use kind of super saw sound. So here again, 2 sawtooth waveform on oscillator 1 from the saw plus with detune, one from, and the other one actually the same, just different position. But here again they are detuned, so that's what creates this nice character. Add a bit of pulse width on the second one, but you can see there is some modulation, and everything goes through a low pass filter, which is again modulated by an envelope. And here it's pretty plucky envelope, so no sustain, very fast attack, and a shorter GK. And especially with the envelope modulating the filter, which is envelope 2, you need something very short, because if you have something long, it's kind of not as sharp and as edgy as you want, as I wanted. So something very plucky and sharp. And then the pulse widths are modulated by LFO1 with again a LFO. Just add this little excitement, it just works well. And then it's go to saturator to make it louder. This is just to cut all the right at the main frequency, which is gonna really give the sound the character of your sound. And then delay, again classic ping pong delay, 3, a bit less feedback. I didn't want it to last too long. A bit of reverb. Make sure the bass in mono. This is just to put it a little bit more on the right. And then drum, same reason, compress everything, put everything in your face, tame the tail of the reverb, add a bit more harmonics with drive and crunch. And yeah, you got our stab. Then you have a second type of stab. Obviously, you don't want the same stab playing over and over, otherwise you get bored. Here is this acid sound. So I use my acid box rack. I will put the link in the description if you want to find out more about this rack. It's basically creating a classic acid sound, so which means like a square or sawtooth going through a low pass filter or a filter with a very high resonance. Usually it's a low pass filter. Here for this rack I use a band pass filter because it gives a different character. The second thing which does the trick as well is the attack. Being at again 30 milliseconds, gonna create this wow, like I said, effect. So instead of having something percussive like this, it's more kind of classic, you have this effect which is sounding really nice. So again, if you want to find out more, I will put the link in the description. This rack, I explain it in the video and you can grab it for free. Then you have a horn sound. So either play low when it's the intro, but then after when it's the break, or when I drop like here, I play with a higher filter. Here again, I use a rack. These are pretty common in techno, and that's why I made a rack as well about it. And I'm not gonna explain it again. There is millions of tutorials already on the internet how to make this type of sound. I have as well one where I explain this rack. I put it in the description if you wanna find out. This is again still the same things. It's super slow sound detune, you know, with a saw wave that you put into a unison, and then you make things louder, stereo, and yeah, and you have your sound. So obviously this is like to attention. Usually when you drop your sound, this works really well to put this type of sound. Like without, this is like kind of, I like to call them like kind of cinematic horn, and this is kind of the kind of sound that you will have when you watch a movie or when you watch a trailer for the movie. You have this kind of French breathy horn, like which add obviously a lot of tension, and this is the same idea. Just yeah, add a dramatic effect, make it like more interesting. And then you have two like kind of more percussive elements. I was talking about cinematic things, and it's here again, it's like I use this at the intro and at above breakdown. It's kind of a cinematic hit into a lot of reverb. It's just a classic percussion basically, which sound like this, and I just filter it a little bit and into a lot of reverb. But you can see long decay, a good amount of dry wet, and it's not something that you will hear at the first listen, but yeah, it's add definitely to your transition and to your sound. And same at the beginning, it helps to the track to don't be too empty at the beginning of without. See, it's like, it's a little detail, but it kind of really adds something. Can't really explain why, but it's just work. And then you have this low hit. Again, this is kind of a cinematic thing, which is basically our kick track. I exactly duplicate it, and I filter the kick obviously because you just want this boomy sound. And without, I feel it's missing something, and yeah, then everything goes into a sub mix down. I will come back to it next week why I have this sub mix down, and then mix down is kind of my master effect. Again, I will come back to it next week because it's more like arrangement purpose, where I have a low cut. So this is what I use, and I have a low cut and the riser effect. I will come back to it when I talk about arrangement and mastering. I will talk about the return and the master. But yeah, in terms of what element of the track and the melody and what they do and why, I think we've done and we've seen everything. So yeah, I hope you've learned a few things. I hope you liked the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to grab the template. It's a great way to support me, and see you next week for part 2, arrangement, automation, mixing and mastering. Thank you very much for watching, guys. See you soon. Bye bye.